The historical identity of the Magyars is initially drawn from the confluence of linguistic and cultural currents within the mid-Volga region, placing their deepest origins within the Finno-Ugric family of languages. This core linguistic foundation, related distantly to the modern Finnish and Estonian tongues, suggests a sedentary, forest-dwelling existence predating their eventual shift to the nomadic pastoralism of the Great Steppes. The eastward pressure from other migrating groups beginning in the 5th century CE propelled these proto-Magyar communities out of their original homeland and into sustained contact with Turkic peoples, fundamentally altering their culture and economy. This period of contact, often termed the Onoga period, resulted in a profound linguistic fusion, absorbing extensive Turkic vocabulary, particularly concerning warfare, horses, and state organization, transforming them into the formidable equestrian society documented by later chroniclers. By the 8th century, the Magyars had migrated further southwest, settling the fertile steppes between the Volga and Don rivers, a territory known historically as Lavidia. Here, they fell within the political and economic orbit of the powerful Khazar Khaganate, a state dominating the Black Sea-Caspian trade routes. The Magyars served as military auxiliaries and frontier guards for the Khazars, an arrangement that both exposed them to sophisticated geopolitical structures and honed their tactical skills in mounted warfare. Crucially, the Khazar influence contributed the structural framework for their emerging political organization, which solidified into a confederation of distinct tribes. Just a quick announcement: if you enjoy this video so far, please subscribe to our channel, as it motivates us to bring you a new story every evening. This is the only kind request tonight, and we won't bother you with it anymore until the very end of today's story. Let's get back to the video. Driven from Lavedia by the incursions of the Pechenegs, a rival Turkic group, the Magyars moved again to a region known as Etelköz, situated between the Dnieper and Dniester rivers. This location, bordering both the Byzantine Empire and various Slavic principalities, allowed them to fully transition into an independent political entity. It was during this consolidation in Etelköz, sometime in the mid-9th century, that the final, defining political covenant was established, the mysterious blood oath. This covenant, sworn by the leaders of the 7 distinct Magyar tribes Nayek, Magyar, Kurtgyarmat, Tarjan, Janu, Ker, and Kesi, along with the allied Kavar groups, formally established the tribal federation, or heptarchy. The oath was not merely a ceremonial promise of fidelity. It was a constitutional act that ratified the supremacy of the dual leadership system. This structure was headed by a spiritual leader, the Kende, and a military commander, the Gula. The historical records indicate that at the time of the oath, the military and political authority was centered around Árpád, who soon consolidated the dual system's power entirely. The increasing hostility and overwhelming military pressure from the Pechenegs along their eastern flank rendered the continued occupation of Etelköz unsustainable. The constant disruption of trade and the military necessity of securing stable territory forced a definitive strategic pivot. This immediate, dire threat, combined with the strategic vision of their newly unified military leadership, set the course for a grand movement to the west. This westward trajectory, anticipating the eventual conquest of the geographically secure Carpathian Basin, was a calculated response to relentless, systemic pressure, setting the stage for the foundational crossing that would define their future identity. The final, compelling movement of the unified tribal federation, executed under the command of Árpád, commenced in 895 CE, driven by external political pressure rather than merely nomadic instinct. This relocation, known as the Honfoglalas, was strategically timed and aligned with the geopolitical maneuverings of the great powers of the era. The initial military engagement preceding the main westward advance involved an alliance forged between the Magyars and the East Frankish Empire, specifically targeting the power of Great Moravia, which represented the dominant Slavic state occupying the northern reaches of the basin. The Magyars served as mercenaries for the Frankish king Arnulf, successfully debilitating the military structure of the Moravian prince Svatopluk. The actual territorial occupation began shortly thereafter, utilizing the vulnerability created by their engagement as proxies. The majority of the Magyar forces entered the basin through the Vrek Pass in the northeastern Carpathians, while other groups systematically used the major mountain corridors, demonstrating a coordinated influx designed to secure multiple entry points simultaneously. This was not a singular, massive migration wave, but a calculated, phased occupation over the span of roughly a decade. The primary territory targeted was the Pannonian Basin, a vast plain defined by the Danube and Tisza rivers, offering immediate access to rich alluvial soils and ample grazing land, vital for their vast horse herds. The population they encountered within the basin was not politically unified. The region was sparsely settled by various Slavic groups and the long-established but politically weak Avar Khaganate remnants, which had maintained a localized presence since their defeat by Charlemagne centuries prior. The Magyars' well-drilled mobile cavalry proved decisively superior to the defensive tactics of these populations, allowing for rapid consolidation of control over the central plains, specifically the Alfold, Great Hungarian Plain. The military dominance of the Federation was asserted by swiftly establishing key defensive positions and securing the critical river crossings necessary for logistics and communication. The final assertion of the Magyars' permanent authority over the entire territory occurred outside the Carpathian Range, the definitive military confrontation confirming the establishment of the Honfoglalas came at the Battle of Pressburg in 907 CE. Here, the consolidated Magyar military, under Árpád's successors, faced a unified, massive coalition of Bavarian forces intending to drive the new arrivals out of the basin and secure the Danube frontier for the Frankish realm. The devastating Hungarian victory at Pressburg effectively dissolved the remaining East Frankish military threat and finalized the territorial status of the Kingdom of Hungary as an independent and permanent sovereign entity in Central Europe. This victory ensured that the Carpathian Basin became the uncontested geographical and political heart of the new Magyar state, concluding the migratory phase and initiating a new century of expansion and engagement with their western neighbours. The period immediately following the final territorial establishment of the Federation, roughly 900 to 955 CE, was characterized by widespread military campaigns into Western and Southern Europe, collectively known as the Kalandozások. These operations were fundamentally systematic, serving as the Magyars' principal economic model, replacing earlier methods as the chief source of wealth and maintaining the military aristocracy's status through the collection of plunder and tribute. The strategic objective of these deep incursions was the extraction of resources from the politically fragmented post-Carolingian realms, leveraging their internal conflicts for maximum gain. The earliest incursions began with focused movements into the Lombard Kingdom of Italy, often conducted at the behest of local claimants seeking military support. The victory at the Battle of the Brenta in 899 CE demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of their mobile warfare against large, established infantry armies, securing access to the wealthy Po Valley and establishing a consistent avenue for future raids into the peninsula. The sphere of influence rapidly expanded, reaching across the entire continent. Chronologies confirm organized expeditions into Saxony and Thuringia in the East Frankish territories, particularly challenging the emergent dynasty of Henry the Fowler, who struggled to consolidate his authority against their pressure. Simultaneously, Western campaigns reached deep into Burgundy, Aquitaine, and even as far as Iberia during the first half of the 10th century. The mobility of their forces was predicated on logistical discipline, minimizing baggage trains and subsisting on the land, allowing for rapid movement that often outpaced established warning systems. Tactically, the Magyars mastered the military doctrine of asymmetric engagement. Their primary force, consisting of light, fast cavalry, utilized the classic feigned retreat to break the cohesion of heavy, less flexible Western European armies. They avoided protracted siege warfare against heavily fortified urban centers, preferring to target monasteries, undefended settlements, and lightly defended aristocratic estates, forcing regional rulers to pay substantial ransoms, often in silver coinage and enslaved persons, to avoid systematic devastation. Critically, the Magyars were integrated into the diplomatic framework of the Byzantine Empire. They repeatedly served as mercenaries for the emperors in Constantinople, participating in campaigns against Bulgarian and Italian territories. This relationship provided the Magyars with reliable intelligence concerning the politics of Western Christendom, and offered a lucrative source of gold payment directly from the wealthiest court in Europe. By the 942s, the Byzantine court of Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus formalized a treaty and even baptized a Magyar chieftain named Termak, recognizing the power of the Western Federation as a diplomatic, rather than merely a military, concern. This system of sustained external exploitation, however, inadvertently spurred the targeted Western polities to develop unified, effective counter-strategies, foreshadowing a major confrontation that would soon prove decisive. The pivotal military engagement that terminated the era of external military excursions occurred in the context of a final aggressive foray into the Germanic lands during the summer of 955 CE. By this time, the previously disorganized European polities had successfully unified under the strong, centralized leadership of the Saxon dynasty. The raiding force, commanded by chieftains Lel, Bulksu, and Sur, was one of the largest and most concentrated mobilized since the Federation's settlement, aimed primarily at the territories of Bavaria and Swabia. Their objective was to exploit the internal rebellion of Ludolf, Duke of Swabia, against his father, Otto I, King of East Francia. However, the Magyars miscalculated the speed of the royal response and the cohesion of the emergent German defense structure. Otto I, having quelled the internal dissent, mobilized a swift and comprehensive coalition army consisting of Bavarian, Swabian, Franconian, and heavily armored Bohemian contingents, positioning them strategically near the city of Augsburg. The ensuing Battle of Lechfeld, fought on August 10, 955 CE, did not conform to the Magyars' successful tactical model of evasion and attrition. Otto's army maintained tight, disciplined formations of heavy cavalry and mounted infantry, resisting the initial barrage of horse archery. Crucially, Otto had positioned his most capable unit, the Bohemian Lancers, in the rearguard, anticipating and successfully countering a decisive flanking maneuver by the Magyars that sought to replicate the classic feigned retreat strategy. When the Magyar army was committed to close-quarters combat, their lighter armor and dependence on missile firepower proved fundamentally inadequate against the heavily equipped Western forces. The engagement swiftly devolved from a tactical confrontation into an overwhelming rout. This was not a localized defeat. The systematic destruction of the Magyar army was finalized during the organized pursuit that followed the initial collapse. Otto I issued strict orders ensuring that none of the fleeing soldiers were permitted safe passage across the Lech and Danube rivers. The military annihilation was immediately followed by a political decapitation. The captured leaders, Bulksu, Lel, and Sur, were transported to Augsburg and executed publicly. This deliberate act removed the core command structure of the old warrior elite, rendering any immediate renewal of the raiding lifestyle impossible and symbolizing the complete subjugation of the former nomadic military command by the authority of the emergent Holy Roman Empire. The irreversible consequences of Lechfeld definitively dismantled the Magyars' century-long economic dependency on external exploitation. It forced the remaining Federation leadership to acknowledge that survival hinged upon the permanent abandonment of the predatory nomadic phase and the immediate adoption of Christian statecraft and institutional alignment with the Western political system. This military disaster catalyzed a profound shift towards sedentary consolidation and Christian monarchy. The profound military reversal at Lechfeld necessitated an immediate existential course correction for the surviving tribal federation, and Prince Geza, a great-grandson of Árpád, emerged as the leader capable of executing this difficult strategic pivot. Ascending to the position of Gyula around 972 CE, Geza recognized that the Federation's military and economic model was obsolete. Continued reliance on external raids was no longer viable against the newly solidified power of the Holy Roman Empire. Survival, he pragmatically assessed, depended entirely on political and religious assimilation into the Western European system. Geza's leadership was characterized by centralized, often ruthless, internal consolidation, specifically aimed at dismantling the authority of the regional chieftains who still clung to the old nomadic ways. His primary objective was to crush the decentralized military power bases that perpetuated the Kalandazasok mentality, substituting it with a unified territorial defense centered on his own dynastic control. The prince secured his immediate western frontier through diplomatic outreach to Otto II, signaling a permanent cessation of hostilities and a willingness to integrate his realm into the European political framework. The most critical aspect of this integration was the formal initiation of Christian conversion. Geza understood that the acceptance of Christianity was not merely a matter of faith, but the fundamental prerequisite for diplomatic recognition and the establishment of an internationally legitimate sovereign state. He cautiously opened the tribal lands to missionaries, primarily sourcing clergy from the German bishoprics, ensuring that the influence was predominantly Latin, yet not exclusive. This process, however, was complex and highly political. Geza famously stated that he was rich enough to worship two gods, indicating a pragmatic approach that allowed many Magyars, including himself, to retain traditional pagan practices while outwardly supporting the new faith to satisfy foreign powers. This dual allegiance allowed for a smoother internal transition, preventing an immediate backlash from the still powerful tribal aristocracy. He was formally baptized, taking the baptismal name Stephen, and secured a politically advantageous marriage for his son. In 996 CE, he arranged for his son, also named Stephen, later Stephen I, to marry Gisela of Bavaria, the sister of the future Holy Roman Emperor, Henry II. This matrimonial alliance was a stroke of strategic genius, securing an unbreakable link to the powerful Bavarian nobility and providing a direct conduit for Western military and administrative expertise. German knights and administrators, accompanying Gisela, introduced formalized concepts of land tenure, military organization, and legal administration, which were vital for the construction of a permanent, sedentary state apparatus. This deliberate adoption of Western institutional frameworks by Geza and the conversion of his direct dynastic line set the irreversible political and religious groundwork for the complete transformation of the chieftaincy into a Christian kingdom. The transition from a mere principality to the internationally recognized Kingdom of Hungary was secured by Stephen I, who succeeded his father, Geza, in 997 CE. Stephen's immediate challenges were internal, facing determined resistance from rival chieftains adhering to the old structure and pagan faith. The most significant threat was his maternal relative, Kopani, Prince of Somogy, who asserted a claim to leadership based on the principle of seniority, levirate marriage to Geza's widow, a relic of nomadic succession law incompatible with dynastic monarchy. The clash, fought shortly after Stephen's ascension, culminated in the Battle of Veszprém, 997 CE. Stephen mobilized his forces, crucially incorporating heavy, armored German knights supplied by his Bavarian connections, giving him a decisive military advantage over Kopany's lighter, traditional Magyar forces. Kopany's defeat and subsequent brutal execution, his body quartered and displayed across the realm, served as a definitive symbol that the era of tribal autonomy was over and the central authority of the new dynasty was absolute. Following the suppression of internal dissent, Stephen turned to institutional legitimation. Around the year 1000 CE, he secured papal recognition and, traditionally, a crown sent by Pope Sylvester II. While the exact provenance of the crown and the papal involvement remain subjects of historical debate, some sources suggest an imperial source. The result was undisputed. Stephen was crowned the first king of Hungary, This act instantly positioned his realm as a legitimate, sovereign Christian state within the European political order, equal in standing to the Western kingdoms. Stephen proceeded to dismantle the remnants of the tribal system with systematic legal and administrative reforms. He forcefully imposed Christianity as the state religion, mandating adherence and establishing a structured ecclesiastical organization. This included founding 10 bishoprics, with Esztergom elevated as the metropolitan see, directly integrating the Hungarian Church into the Roman hierarchy and diminishing the potential for local, pagan-influenced practices. His secular rule was forged through the creation of the Vármegye, or county system, which replaced the loose territorial control of the chieftains. Each county was placed under the authority of a royal official, the Ispán, who served as the king's direct administrator, military leader, and judge. The basis of this consolidation was the conversion of former tribal lands into royal estates, providing the crown with the fiscal and material resources necessary to maintain a standing military and administrative class. Furthermore, Stephen codified the foundational laws of the kingdom, producing 2 major law books. These codes established strict penalties for paganism, protected Christian property, and introduced principles of feudal land tenure and public order modelled on Western precedents. By the time of his death in 1038, Stephen I had successfully transformed a decentralized federation of nomadic warriors into a centralized feudal monarchy, ensuring the long-term survival and Christian character of the Hungarian state. The legitimacy of the newly formed kingdom was intrinsically tied to the regalia of its monarch, centered upon the Holy Crown of Hungary, or Szent Corona. This artifact, though its present form is a compilation of elements dating from different centuries, specifically the Byzantine Corona Graeca and the later Latin upper arches, served immediately as the ultimate, sacred symbol of state sovereignty. Unlike in many Western realms where the crown symbolized the office, in Hungary, the crown itself was considered the source of all public authority and a legal person in its own right, later leading to the doctrine of the Holy Crown. Beyond the physical symbol, Stephen I acquired unique apostolic privileges directly from the papacy. This grant recognized Hungary as a foundational Christian state, converting not through conquest, but through royal initiative. This spiritual endowment placed the Hungarian monarch in an ecclesiastical position nearly unique in Europe, granting him authority within the realm typically reserved for the papacy. He was given the right to organize the church, define its diocesan boundaries, nominate bishops, and supervise the clerical structure without immediate external papal consent. Stephen leveraged this power to meticulously structure the Hungarian ecclesiastical system. He established 2 metropolitan archdioceses, Esztergom and Kalocsa, and created 8 additional suffragan bishoprics. This organized framework was critical for the systematic propagation of Christian faith and the establishment of literacy and administration throughout the kingdom. The dioceses were not randomly assigned. Their locations were carefully chosen to coincide with major political centers and former strongholds of tribal power, ensuring that ecclesiastical authority supported royal power. The king's control over the church extended into its financial administration and infrastructure. He mandated the building of churches in every 10 villages, thereby ensuring the reach of the new faith into the countryside. Furthermore, royal decrees ensured that a mandatory tithe, 1/10 of all produce, was collected from the population, providing the economic independence necessary for the new bishoprics and monasteries to flourish without relying solely on royal coffers. Stephen's dedication to the church was further demonstrated through the foundation of significant monastic communities, most notably the Benedictine Abbey of Pannonhalma. This institution served as a vital cultural bridge, importing Western liturgical practices, scholastic knowledge, and architectural styles, accelerating the Christianization process, and rooting the new kingdom firmly within the Latin cultural sphere. By integrating religious administration directly under the crown's authority, Stephen minimized the potential for conflict between secular and ecclesiastical jurisdictions, solidifying the king's central role as the political and spiritual steward of the Hungarian nation. The newly established Christian monarchy required an administrative architecture capable of governing a vast, integrated territory and superseding the prior tribal system. King Stephen I achieved this through the systematic imposition of the varmagi, or county system, throughout the realm. This structure was the administrative and judicial backbone of the nascent state, ensuring royal authority permeated every region. The territory was divided into approximately 45 to 50 royal counties, with this number fluctuating as new areas were incorporated. Central to each county's operation was the royal official known as the ispan. The ispan was the king's direct representative, a multifunctional official entrusted with comprehensive authority. His duties included military command of the county levies, judicial oversight, and the administration of royal finances and land. He presided over the county court, enforced royal decrees, and maintained the local castle, which often served as the administrative and military hub var of the region. The crown's power was fundamentally derived from its massive landholdings, known as royal estates, or kiralii Bertok. Unlike Western feudal states where the king held limited land compared to powerful dukes, Stephen claimed immediate possession of nearly two-thirds of the entire Hungarian kingdom's land, a legacy secured by the suppression of the tribal chieftains. These vast royal domains provided the overwhelming fiscal and logistical basis for the monarchy. Income from these lands, managed by the ispans and various bailiffs, flowed directly into the royal treasury, financing the court, the army, and infrastructure projects, thereby reducing the crown's reliance on taxation of the general populace. Within this framework, a distinct social class emerged crucial for the maintenance of the state, the servientes regis, or servants of the king. These were free, land-owning warriors and officials who rendered direct personal military and administrative service to the monarch, unbound by obligations to any local magnate or intermediate lord. They held their land, typically smaller holdings carved out of the royal estates, directly from the king in return for their service, positioning them above the common peasantry, but beneath the highest-ranking royal officials, like the ispans. The servientes were instrumental in staffing the county administration and constituting the professional core of the royal army. They represented a layer of loyal, military-capable free men whose status relied solely on the king's favour, making them a powerful counterweight to any regional attempts at autonomy by the higher nobility. Their rights and freedoms, established early in the 11th century, were explicitly royal grants, not inherited customary rights. This group's distinct legal and social position defined by service, rather than mere birthright, provided the essential legal foundation that would evolve over the next 2 centuries into the formal Hungarian nobility, complete with codified liberties and political influence that would dramatically shape the kingdom's constitutional future. The death of Stephen I in 1038 CE plunged the newly forged kingdom into a period of extreme instability that lasted for nearly 5 decades. Stephen's designated heir, his nephew Peter Orseolo, a Venetian noble, lacked internal support and immediately faced determined opposition from the local nobility, who favoured the traditional Árpád lineage. This power vacuum inaugurated a cycle of brutal civil wars and external interference, primarily from the Holy Roman Empire. Peter Orseolo's reign was short and controversial. His reliance on foreign advisors and his perceived subservience to the German Emperor Henry III quickly alienated the Magyar lords. He was deposed in 1041 by a native chieftain, Samuel Abba, a relative of Stephen's, who attempted to restore a more decentralized authority. Abba's subsequent reign was characterized by internal purges and mass executions of German and Italian nobles, demonstrating the fierce resistance to foreign-influenced centralism. However, the exiled Peter appealed directly to Emperor Henry III, providing the German ruler with the ideal pretext for military intervention and the assertion of imperial suzerainty over Hungary. Henry III launched multiple substantial campaigns, most notably in 1044 CE, culminating in the Battle of Menfeu. The defeat and subsequent execution of Samuel Abba led to Peter Orseolo's brief restoration, during which he formally recognized Henry III as his overlord, agreeing to pay tribute and accept the imperial standard. This act threatened the kingdom's hard-won sovereignty. The persistent political chaos fueled a powerful conservative and pagan backlash. The most significant of these was the Vata Rebellion in 1046 CE, a massive uprising centered on the Great Hungarian Plain. Pagan leaders explicitly aimed to dismantle the Christian ecclesiastical structure and restore the nomadic political and religious order, symbolized by the murder of Bishop Gerard of Sarnard and 2 other prelates. This violent revolt coincided with the return of Stephen's exiled cousins, including Andrew and Bela, who were invited back by the pagan factions as potential rulers who might tolerate their ancestral beliefs. Prince Andrew, leveraging the support of the pagan forces, seized power and was crowned Andrew I. While he initially appeased the pagan rebels once established, he brutally suppressed the Vata Rebellion and reaffirmed the Christian foundation of the state, realizing that survival depended on Western integration. However, the internal struggle persisted, soon fracturing the relationship between Andrew and his capable brother Bela over succession rights, leading to further civil war. It was not until the reign of Ladislaus I, 1077 to 1095 CE, half a century after Stephen's death, that the central authority of the Árpád dynasty was fully restored and consolidated. Ladislaus, through decisive military action, comprehensive legal codification, and successful defense against both the Cumans and the Holy Roman Empire, definitively ended the Civil War era, establishing the stable political and legal basis necessary for Hungary to enter its medieval Golden Age. The accession of Ladislaus I in 1077 CE marked the definitive end of the civil wars that had plagued the realm following Stephen's death, ushering in an era of internal stability and external expansion. Ladislaus, a figure simultaneously viewed as a warrior and a deeply pious reformer, focused immediately on the reconstruction of the central authority through the codification of law. His legislative work, known as Lex Ladislaus, addressed the widespread disorder and property disputes that had accumulated during the succession crisis. Ladislaus's legal code was exceptionally stringent, designed to combat the lingering societal turbulence and the erosion of Christian morals. He imposed harsh penalties for offences against property, particularly theft, reflecting the need to restore the security of ownership after decades of internal conflict. His laws essentially treated repeated theft as a capital crime, viewing it as an attack on the foundational order of the Christian state. This legal rigor extended to enforcing ecclesiastical discipline, mandating church attendance, and severely punishing those who continued to practice pagan rituals or disregard Christian holy days. The objective was the comprehensive subjugation of residual anarchic elements and the enforcement of the state's Christian identity. Beyond internal consolidation, Ladislaus was a highly effective military leader, notably in repelling external threats. The Cuman Confederation, a nomadic Turkic group that had replaced the Pechenegs on the eastern steppes, represented the most significant persistent threat. Ladislaus executed a series of decisive military campaigns against the Cumans, most famously the victory at the Battle of Kurles, or Shur-Hallam, in 1068 CE, which secured the eastern frontiers and earned him renown as a powerful defender of Christendom. This success allowed him to settle certain loyal Cuman and Pecheneg groups within the borderlands, establishing a system of military colonists to buttress the kingdom's defences. Ladislaus's military ambition led to his most consequential act of territorial expansion, the annexation of Croatia. Following a dynastic crisis in the neighbouring Croatian kingdom, Ladislaus, asserting the rights of his sister Helena, who was the late Croatian king's widow, intervened militarily in 1091 CE. His forces quickly occupied the northern regions of Croatia, installing his nephew Almos as the governor. This action firmly established the personal union of the Hungarian and Croatian crowns, bringing the strategically vital Dalmatian coast and its ports under the influence of the Árpád dynasty. The reign culminated in the formal canonization of Stephen I, his son Emeric, and Bishop Gerard in 1083 CE. This crucial ecclesiastical event, pushed by Ladislaus, solidified the moral and spiritual foundation of the monarchy, directly linking the ruling house to sainthood. Ladislas himself, due to his piety, legislative severity, and chivalric image as the great defender of the faith, was posthumously venerated as a knight saint, embodying the ideal of Christian kingship in Central European culture. His consolidation of law and successful expansion created the essential framework for the Hungarian Golden Age that would follow. The integration of the Kingdom of Croatia into the Hungarian realm was a gradual process initiated by King Ladislaus I and finalized by his successor, Koloman, creating an enduring composite monarchy that profoundly altered Hungary's geopolitical identity. This expansion was rooted in dynastic legitimacy and driven by strategic necessity to secure the Adriatic frontier. The immediate catalyst for Hungarian intervention was the death of the last native Croatian ruler, King Demetrius Zvonimir, in 1089 CE. The resulting succession crisis saw various internal claimants vying for the throne, leading to a period of instability. King Ladislaus, asserting the dynastic rights of his sister, Helena, Zvonimir's widow, claimed a legitimate stake in the succession. In 1091 CE, Ladislaus launched a focused military campaign, resulting in the swift occupation of a significant portion of northern Croatia, including the strategically important region of Slavonia. This move was justified by the Hungarian court as an effort to restore order and assert a valid claim based on kinship ties to the former ruling house. Ladislaus did not immediately annex the entire kingdom. Instead, he installed his nephew, Prince Almos, as governor of the captured territories, establishing a temporary structure of indirect rule that acknowledged the local institutions while securing Magyar control. However, this action drew immediate attention from the powerful maritime city-states of the Dalmatian coast, particularly Venice, and from the Byzantine Empire, which traditionally held suzerainty over the region. The subsequent years were marked by military and diplomatic conflict, particularly as the Croatians continued to resist the imposition of Hungarian authority. The definitive legal and political framework for the Union was established under King Koloman R 1095-1116 CE, who was forced to dedicate years to military consolidation. After repeated campaigns to quell Croatian resistance, Koloman secured a landmark agreement in 1102 CE, known as the Pacta Conventa, a document whose historicity is debated, but whose principles are universally recognized as forming the basis of the Union. Crucially, this agreement stipulated that the Hungarian king would rule as the King of Croatia in a personal union. Croatia retained its distinct legal institutions, coinage, and its own assembly, Saber, while being administered by a royal deputy, the Ban of Croatia. This personal union was fundamentally different from an outright conquest. The Croatian nobles, or plemenity, accepted the Árpád ruler, but retained their extensive land rights and privileges. The union granted Hungary access to the Dalmatian coast, which was vital for trade and military logistics, transforming the landlocked kingdom into a regional power with significant naval interests. Conversely, it offered Croatia powerful military protection and political stability, enduring internal and external pressures, solidifying a complex political entity that persisted for 8 centuries under the authority of the Hungarian crown. The reign of King Koloman R 1095-1116 CE presented a distinct intellectual contrast to his warrior predecessor, Ladislaus I. Koloman was notable for his high level of education, earning him the moniker Könyves Kalman, or Koloman the Book Lover. This intellectual background influenced his legal and diplomatic approach, reflected in his celebrated decree concerning witchcraft, which stated, "Destrigus vero quae non sunt, nulla amplius fiat mentio," meaning that witches, being non-existent, should not be subject to further trials or persecution. This rationalistic stance demonstrated a king prioritizing scholarship over superstition. Koloman's rule was immediately challenged by the chaotic arrival of the First Crusade in 1096 CE. Hungary, positioned along the principal land route to the Holy Land, was crossed by large, undisciplined military forces. Koloman's government successfully navigated this immense logistical and security challenge through a combination of firm regulation and military vigilance. He enforced strict rules on transit, demanding that the Crusader armies, particularly the massive but ill-supplied People's Crusade, surrender their weapons upon crossing the frontier and march under heavy Hungarian escort. When certain factions disregarded these mandates and began pillaging, Koloman responded decisively, using his own forces to suppress the violence, thereby safeguarding the kingdom's sovereignty and internal order while facilitating the broader crusading movement. Following the consolidation of the Croatian Union, Koloman was drawn into persistent and complex diplomatic and military struggles with the Byzantine Empire in the Balkans. Byzantine foreign policy, under Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, viewed the Hungarian expansion into Dalmatia and the subsequent acquisition of strategic coastal cities, particularly those formerly under Byzantine control, as a direct threat to imperial authority. This entanglement resulted in a series of intricate military campaigns. Koloman engaged in repeated clashes over the suzerainty of the minor Slavic principalities and cities along the shared frontier, often leveraging local unrest against Byzantine garrisons. His primary objective was to maintain the newly secured Adriatic territories against the powerful naval and military resources of Constantinople. This required a sustained commitment of Hungarian resources to the southern theatre, diverting attention from the northern plains. Koloman's diplomacy further complicated matters through strategic royal marriages, attempting to bind the fragmented Balkan principalities to the Hungarian court. The rivalry intensified under the subsequent reign of Alexios's son John II Komnenos, leading to further direct confrontation and a sustained period of tense coexistence, where military maneuvering was constantly interlaced with diplomatic negotiation, demonstrating Koloman's ability to engage the sophisticated millenary power of the Eastern Roman Empire on equal terms. The reign of Bela III, 1172–1196 CE, represents a pinnacle of administrative and economic flourishing during the Árpád era, profoundly influenced by his formative years at the Byzantine court. Bela, initially named Alexius, spent a decade in Constantinople under the patronage of Emperor Manuel I Komnenos, an arrangement rooted in complex succession politics. This unusual upbringing exposed him to the most advanced bureaucratic systems in contemporary Europe, which he later meticulously imported into the Hungarian realm upon his ascension. His primary achievement was the wholesale modernization of royal administration. Bela recognized that governing an expanding, wealthy, and legally complex kingdom required moving beyond the oral traditions and decentralized authority inherited from earlier tribal structures. To address this, he established the royal chancellery as a permanent, centralized institution responsible for generating, recording, and authenticating all royal documents. This institution was headed by the chancellor, a position usually occupied by a learned church dignitary, ensuring professional, literate management. The introduction of widespread written record-keeping marked a dramatic departure from precedent. Bela III explicitly decreed that all charters and significant legal acts must be committed to parchment. This systematic documentation provided a verifiable legal record, standardized administrative practices across the numerous varmajek, counties, and significantly curtailed the arbitrary exercise of power by regional royal officials. The Chancellery utilized a standard, official seal and formal Latin legal terminology, effectively integrating Hungary's legal output with that of Western European monarchies. This administrative reform provided the framework for unprecedented fiscal control. The foundation of Bela's wealth lay in the efficient management of royal regalia and the collection of customs duties. He meticulously centralized control over key monopolies, particularly salt and mining. The Hungarian salt mines, a major strategic resource, were administered directly by royal appointees, generating immense, consistent revenue. Furthermore, Bela was the first Hungarian king to impose a systematic, large-scale tax on external trade, utilizing his control over key transit points along the major European trade arteries. The kingdom's new level of organization and wealth was visibly demonstrated by the initiation of regular minting of high-quality silver coinage, and Bela's significant investment in monumental architecture. He commissioned the first systematic written record of the kingdom's financial resources, demonstrating an advanced bureaucratic capacity unique among many of his contemporary Western European rulers. Historians estimate Bela III's annual income rivaled, and perhaps even surpassed, that of the King of England, Richard the Lionheart, making medieval Hungary a major economic power in the European system. This centralized professional administration ensured that the power of the crown was financially and legally buttressed, laying a stable foundation for the following century. The issuance of the Golden Bull of 1222 by King Andrew II Árpád, 1235 CE, marked the formal codification of constitutional limits on royal power, fundamentally shifting the legal relationship between the monarch and the nobility. This crisis was precipitated by a series of long-standing abuses that alienated the crown's primary support base: the servientes regis, or royal servants, and the lower nobility. Andrew II's administration was characterized by extravagant spending and the policy of new institutions, novae institutions, which involved granting immense tracts of royal land, the traditional source of royal power, to his foreign favourites and the small circle of great barons. This systematic diminution of the regnum's assets directly undermined the landless and increasingly impoverished servientes, who relied on the king for military service stipends and judicial protection. Furthermore, Andrew II introduced debased currency and imposed heavy taxes, particularly on ecclesiastical property, exacerbating the economic grievances felt across the realm. The crisis peaked around 1220 CE. The servientes regis, effectively freemen who owned property and served directly under the king, organized themselves to present a unified list of grievances. Their demands centered on securing their land tenure, ensuring fair legal treatment, and curbing the arbitrary authority of the powerful magnates, great barons, and royal officials who administered the counties. This organized dissent, which transcended regional boundaries, demonstrated an unprecedented political maturity among the lower nobility. Facing overwhelming internal opposition and lacking the military strength to suppress the widespread rebellion, Andrew II was compelled to negotiate. The resulting Golden Bull was formally issued in 1222 CE at the Diet of Székesfehérvár. The document, consisting of 31 articles, established specific immunities for the entire noble class, including freedom from extraordinary taxation and the obligation to participate in foreign military campaigns only at the king's expense. Crucially, it guaranteed that the nobility could not be arbitrarily imprisoned and protected them against having their property seized without due legal process. The most profound constitutional innovation of the Golden Bull was Article 31, the ius resistendi, or the right of resistance. This article granted the archbishops, bishops, and other nobles the legal right to collectively oppose the king without incurring the penalty of treason, should the monarch or his successors attempt to violate the liberties established by the Charter. While this right was later formally revoked in 1687 CE, its inclusion represented an early and powerful European example of institutionalized checks and balances on royal absolutism, transforming Hungary's political system into a legally defined, shared sovereignty between the crown and the nobles, laying the foundation for the enduring noble nation, natio Hungarica concept. The existential crisis that threatened the very survival of the nascent kingdom began with the swift, overwhelming invasion of 1241 CE by the Mongol Golden Horde. This campaign, orchestrated by Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, was a meticulously planned, multi-pronged strategic operation aimed at neutralizing Hungary as a geopolitical rival following its refusal to surrender Cuman refugees. King Bela IV 1235–1270 CE, and his court were acutely aware of the Mongol threat, having received dire warnings and reports from Eastern observers. Yet the kingdom's internal political paralysis and fragmented military structure rendered effective preparation impossible. The invasion commenced in March 1241 CE. The primary Mongol force, commanded by Batu and Subutai, the greatest Mongol general, entered through the Verek Pass, the same route the Magyars had used for their Honfoglas centuries earlier, while a northern contingent struck through Poland to prevent regional aid. The Mongol advance was characterized by unparalleled speed and logistical efficiency, traversing the Carpathian Mountains with winter mobility unknown to European armies. Bela IV's response involved summoning the levée en masse, or general military levy, which included the fragmented forces of the great barons and the bishops. However, the Hungarian army was outdated and ill-equipped, hampered by internal dissension, a deep-seated suspicion of the king's Cuman allies, and a reliance on heavy, static cavalry ill-suited to counter the nomadic tactics of the Mongols. The decisive military confrontation occurred on the 11th of April 1241, at the Battle of Mohács, also known as the Battle of the Sajo River. The Hungarian forces, positioned defensively, were initially confident, but the Mongol tactical genius proved catastrophic. Subutai executed a daring flanking maneuver under cover of darkness, crossing the Sajo River further north and encircling the main Hungarian camp. When the main engagement began, the Mongols employed their trademark composite bow fire and disciplined feigned retreats, drawing the heavily armoured Hungarian cavalry into a prepared killing zone. The resulting rout was an unmitigated disaster for the kingdom. The army was annihilated, and nearly all the major military and ecclesiastical leaders were killed in action. Following Mohács, the kingdom was rendered militarily defenceless. Bela IV fled westward, eventually seeking refuge on the Dalmatian coast. The Mongols subsequently occupied the entire central basin for a full year. They systematically burned urban centres, including Pesta, and exacted a terrifying toll on the civilian population, often targeting villages and smaller settlements that had initially survived the military campaign. The year of occupation, marked by famine and mass enslavement, resulted in an estimated 20 to 30% depopulation of the entire realm, threatening the fundamental demographic and economic integrity of the Hungarian state. The Great Fear only subsided when the Mongols abruptly withdrew in 1242 CE, following the death of Great Khan Ogedei in Karakorum, a strategic necessity that unexpectedly granted Hungary a reprieve from total obliteration. The abrupt withdrawal of the Mongols in 1242 CE left the kingdom in a state of catastrophic devastation and demographic collapse. King Bela IV, the true 1235–1270 CE, returning from his refuge on the Dalmatian coast, recognized that the survival of the Hungarian state depended on a wholesale revision of its military and settlement policy. This monumental reconstruction effort earned him the moniker Second Founder of the Realm. His strategy was founded on two core intertwined principles: permanent fortification and systematic repopulation. The primary lesson learned from the Mohács disaster was the military inadequacy of earth and wood fortifications against coordinated nomadic siege warfare. Consequently, Bela IV immediately initiated a massive nationwide program of stone castle building. This initiative was driven by royal decree and financial incentives rather than direct royal construction. The king offered vast royal domains and hereditary privileges to great barons, bishops, and secular lords who committed to constructing permanent, defensible stone castles varak at their own expense. This policy effectively decentralized the kingdom's defense, creating hundreds of strongholds that could serve as local refuges and centers of resistance should the Mongols return, a threat Bela IV considered constant. Simultaneously, Bela IV focused on establishing a new defensible urban network. He granted extensive privileges to royal cities, encouraging the construction of stone walls and bastions. The establishment of Buda as a fortified royal capital, built on a secure hill overlooking the Danube, was a direct consequence of this strategy, intended to be less vulnerable than the burned-out Pesta. The king promoted the development of free royal towns, guaranteeing them judicial and economic autonomy in exchange for building and maintaining urban defences. To counter the severe depopulation resulting from the Mongol occupation, the king implemented a robust immigration policy. He aggressively invited and settled large numbers of foreign colonists, including German, Flemish, and Walloon settlers, granting them favourable legal exemptions and agricultural lands in depopulated or strategically important regions, such as the northern mining towns and the southern frontier. Most notably, Bela IV brought back the Cumans, the nomadic Turkic people whose presence had initially triggered the Mongol invasion, settling them in the fertile plains, the Kunsag, in exchange for military service as light cavalry, thereby integrating proven mobile warriors into the kingdom's new defence structure. The second founding shifted the geopolitical and demographic character of the realm. The transfer of extensive royal lands for castle construction inevitably eroded the fiscal and military power of the crown, significantly empowering the great magnates who now commanded their own private armies and fortresses. This trade-off prioritized national security and demographic recovery over the centralized royal authority established by Stephen I, establishing a new internal balance of power that would define the kingdom's politics for the subsequent century. The later half of the 13th century witnessed a severe accelerating fragmentation of royal authority, directly undermining the centralized state structures that had been forged over centuries. The extensive land transfers and castle construction subsidies granted to magnates during the reconstruction efforts following the Mongol withdrawal unintentionally created semi-independent territorial lordships. These powerful barons leveraged their fortified strongholds and private military forces to defy the crown, effectively transforming the kingdom into a collection of autonomous regional entities. This decentralized power base led to the emergence of the oligarchs, or kiskaraliok, little kings, who operated with virtual sovereignty within their domains. Families such as the Sak and Kursagi clans consolidated control over multiple counties, monopolizing royal revenues, levying their own customs duties, and administering justice without appeal to the monarch. The crown's attempts to enforce its will within these territories were consistently met with armed resistance, signifying the failure of central administration. The reign of Ladislaus IV, 1272–1290 CE, exemplified this systemic breakdown. Despite inheriting the throne at a young age, his political life was characterized by continuous military and diplomatic failure, particularly his attempts to reconcile the nobility with his Cuman heritage, which alienated the Catholic hierarchy and provided pretext for magnate opposition. His administration was dominated by civil conflict and external pressure from the Habsburgs. His assassination in 1290 CE by disaffected nobles merely underscored the complete collapse of respect for royal sanctity and authority within the realm. Ladislaus IV was succeeded by Andrew III, 1291–301 CE, the last recognized male heir of the Árpád lineage, albeit one whose legitimacy was often disputed by foreign powers and domestic rivals. Andrew III dedicated his brief and precarious reign to the near-impossible task of restoring central authority. He utilized the support of the lesser nobility, who saw him as their only defense against the tyranny of the little kings, in an effort to curb the magnates' territorial ambitions. He attempted to implement royal commissions, convene the Diet, and secure the return of illegally alienated royal assets, but his efforts were constantly frustrated by the entrenched power structures. Andrew III's death in 1301 CE was sudden and ultimately fatal to the dynastic line. Because he left no male issue, the direct line of Árpád, which had ruled Hungary for over 4 centuries since the Honfoglalars, became extinct. This moment triggered the interregnum, 1301–1308 CE, a period of intense civil strife, as various foreign princes claiming descent through female lines contested the throne. The extinction of the founding, sacred dynasty removed the ultimate source of political legitimacy, plunging the kingdom into an acute 7-year constitutional and military crisis before a new foreign dynasty could finally assert control over the shattered realm. The constitutional and military vacuum created by the extinction of the Árpád dynasty in 1301 CE initiated a protracted 7-year interregnum, characterized by internal power struggles and foreign claimants. The central issue was not merely succession but legitimacy, as Hungarian law dictated that the crown, the Holy Crown of Hungary, could only be conferred by the Archbishop of Esztergom in Székesfehérvár, a ritual many foreign princes initially ignored. Among the several contenders, Charles Robert of the House of Anjou, known as Károly Robert in Hungary, held the strongest dynastic claim through his grandmother, Mary of Hungary, daughter of King Stephen V. Charles Robert's succession was neither swift nor peaceful. Initially crowned in 1301 with a provisional diadem, he faced immediate opposition from powerful rival claimants, most notably Wenceslaus, the heir to the Bohemian throne, and Otto of Bavaria. More formidable than the foreign rivals were the entrenched Hungarian oligarchs, such as Matthias, who actively resisted any consolidation of centralized royal power. For 7 years, the kingdom endured a state of near anarchy, with the Anjou prince struggling to establish a legitimate base of support against the little kings, who controlled most of the realm's territory and castles. The turning point for the Anjou cause arrived in 1308 CE. With papal support and the political neutralization of his foreign rivals, Charles Robert was finally recognized as the undisputed monarch. However, the subsequent decade was devoted entirely to a relentless military campaign to subjugate the oligarchs. This was a war of attrition, culminating in the decisive victory at the Battle of Rozgany in 1312 CE, where the royal forces, supported by the rising lesser nobility, shattered the power of the Sark faction. This victory, followed by 2 decades of methodical campaigning, successfully dismantled the great baronial provinces and restored genuine centralized royal authority for the first time since the Mongol invasion. With political stability secured, Charles Robert initiated profound economic and fiscal reforms that permanently altered Hungary's standing in European commerce. The core of this reform was the nationalization of the precious metals industry. By effectively seizing control of the immense gold and silver mines primarily in Upper Hungary, modern Slovakia, the crown implemented a centralized monopoly over mining and coinage. This led to the introduction of the Hungarian gold forint in 1325, modelled on the Florentine florin. The forint quickly became the primary stable hard currency in Central Europe, underpinning the kingdom's status as a major financial power. Further revenue streams were secured through fiscal modernization, replacing the outdated flat tax structure with new tariffs and centralized customs duties, notably the 30 toll on all commercial goods crossing the border. This financial strength enabled Charles Robert to establish a professional royal administration, finance a new permanent military structure, and pursue an active, influential foreign policy, including the successful Visegrad Pact of 1335 with Poland and Bohemia, creating a stable political and commercial alliance in the northern European sphere. The Anjou dynasty had successfully ended the era of oligarchic chaos and forged a powerful, fiscally sound European state. The reign of Louis I, 1342–1382 CE, son of Charles Robert, represents the absolute political and military zenith of the medieval Hungarian state. Inheriting a centralized monarchy buttressed by immense gold revenues, Louis pursued an aggressive, expansionist foreign policy that established him as the undisputed hegemon of Central Europe and the Balkans. His ambitions were vast, stemming from his inherited claim to the Kingdom of Naples, a dynastic right that initiated decades of costly, complex military engagement in southern Italy. The most intense theatre of this Neapolitan conflict was triggered by the murder of Louis's younger brother, Andrew, Duke of Calabria, who was married to Queen Joanna I of Naples. Louis I launched 2 massive punitive expeditions between 1347 and 1350 CE. These campaigns, though ultimately failing to secure permanent control of Naples against papal and local resistance, demonstrated Hungary's capacity to project power deep into the Mediterranean sphere. Critically, these actions were financed almost entirely by the nationalized gold mines, underscoring the success of his father's fiscal reforms. Beyond the Mediterranean, Louis I established a territorial and diplomatic empire of unprecedented scope. His influence extended directly along the southern frontier, where he subdued the semi-independent princes of Wallachia and Moldavia, compelling them to accept Hungarian suzerainty and providing strategic defense against the rising Ottoman power. He maintained effective dominion over the Croatian, Dalmatian, and Bosnian regions, securing the entirety of the Adriatic coast for the composite monarchy after defeating the rival Republic of Venice in the War of Chioggia, finalized by the Peace of Zadar in 1358 CE. This treaty compelled Venice to relinquish control of the Dalmatian cities, granting Hungary its first significant direct access to naval power and maritime commerce. The crowning achievement of Louis's reign was the personal union with Poland. Upon the death of his maternal uncle, Casimir III of Poland, in 1370 CE, Louis inherited the Polish throne. This union, lasting until 1382 CE, placed the vast territories of both kingdoms under the rule of the Hungarian Anjou House, creating a colossal state stretching from the Baltic to the Black and Adriatic Seas. This diplomatic triumph confirmed Louis I as the dominant sovereign power in the entire Central and Eastern European geopolitical structure. Domestically, Louis I consolidated the social framework of the nobility. His decree of 1351 CE confirmed and codified the rights and privileges granted in the Golden Bull of 1222, notably affirming the single, standardized legal status of the entire Hungarian nobility, una idemque libertas, solidifying the lesser nobility's position against the remaining powerful magnates. This combination of successful warfare, fiscal strength, vast territorial influence, and legal reform truly defined the latter half of the 14th century as the golden age of the medieval Kingdom of Hungary. The arrival of the Black Death in the Carpathian Basin, approximately between 1347 and 1349 CE, initiated a period of profound demographic and social trauma, consistent with the pandemic's sweep across the Eurasian landmass. The plague followed established trade routes and military roads, entering the kingdom primarily through Dalmatian ports and the southern border regions, resulting in high localized mortality spikes. While precise statistical records are unavailable, demographic models suggest the kingdom experienced significant population contraction, though the impact was generally less severe than in the highly urbanized, densely populated regions of Western Europe and Italy. Several key factors contributed to this relative demographic resilience. Hungary possessed a lower overall population density compared to the West, which naturally restricted the sustained propagation of the contagion in rural areas. Furthermore, the kingdom's agrarian economy was predominantly decentralized, relying on dispersed manorial estates rather than compact urban centers. The disease initially flourished in cities such as Buda and Kassa, but the slower rate of transmission across the vast rural plains somewhat mitigated the nationwide casualty rate experienced by other European states. The immediate economic consequence of the pandemic was a dramatic labor shortage, which fundamentally shifted the agrarian power balance. Landowners, suffering from a lack of available peasant labor, were compelled to offer more favorable tenant terms, indirectly resulting in the improvement of the peasants' economic condition. Labor mobility increased, and landlords competed to attract and retain tenants, often through the reduction of labor services robot and the substitution of coin payments, cents, for traditional in-kind rents. This transition toward a commercialized, fluid labor market was accelerated by the demographic crisis. However, the most critical mitigating factor for the Hungarian crown and its aristocracy lay in the kingdom's immense financial resources. The state's control over the nationalized gold and silver mines in Upper Hungary, provided a unique buffer against the fiscal shocks experienced by states relying solely on taxation. As coin production in the West often suffered deflationary crises due to reduced mining output during the pandemic, the Hungarian treasury continued to issue the stable gold forint, ensuring liquidity and facilitating economic recovery and necessary military spending. Furthermore, the structure of the Hungarian manorial economy exhibited a strategic resilience. Unlike the specialized economies of Western Europe, which suffered systemic collapse when specific sectors were crippled, the Hungarian agrarian system was largely self-sufficient, reducing its vulnerability to external market failures. This combination of lower density, existing silver and gold reserves, and a resilient, localized manorial system allowed the kingdom to absorb the devastating shock of the pandemic without experiencing the complete administrative and fiscal breakdown witnessed in many of its Western counterparts. Consequently, the kingdom maintained its political stability and military capacity during the critical decades immediately following the pandemic. The accession of Sigismund of Luxembourg to the Hungarian throne in 1387 CE initiated a complex 5-decade reign defined by his unparalleled geopolitical reach and persistent financial instability. Sigismund, already Elector of Brandenburg and later King of Bohemia and Holy Roman Emperor, governed a vast, multi-crowned inheritance, but this breadth of titles often overshadowed the reality of his power base, which was initially fragile in Hungary. His marriage to Mary, daughter of Louis the Great, secured his claim, yet his authority was immediately challenged by powerful magnates, leading to his temporary imprisonment and forced concessions, demonstrating the continued weakness of the central royal prerogative. Sigismund's tenure was plagued by the immense debt inherited from the final, costly years of the Anjou dynasty, combined with the exorbitant expenses required to prosecute his multiple foreign policy objectives and secure his imperial ambitions. To sustain his rule, he frequently alienated large tracts of crown lands and pawned royal castles to loyal barons, systematically undermining the fiscal and territorial foundations of the state built by the Árpáds and Anjous. This policy, while securing immediate political survival, permanently weakened the crown's independent wealth and solidified the territorial power of the great landowning families. A pivotal defining feature of Sigismund's reign was the dawn of the Ottoman confrontation. Having effectively eliminated its Balkan rivals, the Ottoman Empire represented an existential threat to Hungary's southern frontiers. Sigismund recognized the gravity of this challenge and sought to mobilize the entire apparatus of Western Christendom. His most significant undertaking was the organization of the Crusade of Nicopolis in 1396 CE, a massive multinational effort drawing forces from France, Burgundy, and the German principalities. The campaign culminated in the catastrophic Battle of Nicopolis in modern-day Bulgaria. The Crusader strategy, which lacked cohesion and discipline, failed primarily due to the premature, uncoordinated charge by the French knights, who disregarded Sigismund's tactical advice. The resulting rout by the Ottoman forces under Sultan Bayezid led to the slaughter or capture of the majority of the Crusader army. Although Sigismund himself escaped via the Black Sea, the defeat shattered the concept of a unified European military response and confirmed the Ottoman presence as the dominant force in the Balkans. In the aftermath, Sigismund was forced to reorganize the kingdom's defense, pioneering the establishment of the Southern Border Defense System, or Vegvar system, consisting of permanent garrisons and fortresses along the Danube and Sava rivers. Furthermore, the defeat catalyzed political changes, compelling Sigismund to convene the Diet more frequently and grant further constitutional concessions to the nobility, acknowledging the need for their consent and resources in the face of continuous external threat. His legacy is one of continuous crisis management, successfully holding together a vast multinational territory while facing the first tragic hammer blows of Ottoman aggression. The later decades of Sigismund's reign, concurrent with his tenure as Holy Roman Emperor, were dominated by the complex and protracted Hussite wars in neighboring Bohemia. This conflict, triggered by the execution of the religious reformer Jan Hus in 1415 CE during the Council of Constance, became a major geopolitical challenge that simultaneously drained Hungarian resources and diverted the king's focus from the southern front. Sigismund claimed the Bohemian throne by inheritance, but the religiously motivated, militarily sophisticated Hussite factions fiercely resisted his ascent, translating into decades of mandatory Hungarian military intervention. Hungary's direct involvement began after 1420 CE, following the official deposition of Sigismund by the Bohemian Diet. The Diet of the Hungarian nobility frequently voted for extraordinary subsidies and levies the lucrum camerae to finance the continuous stream of punitive crusades against the Hussites. These campaigns required significant mobilization of the Hungarian feudal host and paid mercenary forces, placing a severe financial strain on the kingdom already struggling with Sigismund's debt and the costs of the Vegvár defense system. Militarily, the Hussite forces proved exceptionally difficult to defeat. They pioneered the use of Wagenburg wagon fort tactics, converting war wagons into mobile defensive fortifications bristling with infantry and early firearms. This revolutionary approach neutralized the traditional superiority of heavily armored Hungarian and German cavalry. Hungarian commanders were forced to adopt new military doctrines and utilize their own feudal levies in protracted, frustrating sieges and border defense actions, rather than the decisive cavalry engagements they preferred. The conflict was not confined to Bohemia. Beginning in the 1422, radical Hussite armies launched devastating counter-raids into Hungarian territories, specifically Upper Hungary, modern Slovakia. These incursions focused on the strategic mining towns and ecclesiastical centres, further pressuring Sigismund to allocate resources to the defence of his northern frontier. To stabilise this vulnerable region, Sigismund utilised a diplomatic strategy, securing a 15-year treaty with the Polish crown that temporarily shielded Hungary's eastern flank from Polish Hussite collaboration. The long-term impact on Hungary was primarily fiscal and demographic. The continuous need for military expenditure fueled inflation and necessitated further alienation of royal assets, confirming the diminished economic independence of the crown. Furthermore, the conflict complicated Sigismund's efforts to consolidate his authority within the Holy Roman Empire. The king's frequent and often fruitless preoccupation with the Bohemian crisis meant the Kingdom of Hungary received diminished imperial support and resources, leaving it to bear the primary burden of the expensive war and its aftermath largely alone. The Hussite Wars therefore stand as a colossal distraction that weakened Hungarian preparedness, just as the Ottoman threat to the south was accelerating its pace. The protracted instability and external military pressure marking the extinction of the Árpád dynasty and the subsequent interregnum severely diminished the royal prerogative. Following the collapse of the Anjou succession and the tumultuous initial decades of Sigismund's reign, the necessity of continuous magnate support forced the monarch to make successive constitutional concessions, gradually formalizing the role of the nobility in state governance. This process culminated in the institutional recognition of the Diet, or National Assembly of Nobles, as a permanent and powerful legislative body. The Diet of the Kingdom of Hungary, known as the Országgyűlés, evolved from earlier, informal councils, conventus, and became the definitive organ for consent, taxation, and military mobilization. Its structure was fundamentally unicameral during this era, consisting primarily of the lower nobility, servientes, and the high clergy, though the great magnates frequently exerted their influence as an unofficial upper chamber. By the early 15th century, the Diet secured the right to consent to all extraordinary taxation and the calling of the feudal levy, insurrectio, directly restricting the king's financial and military autonomy. The Diet's ascent was catalyzed by royal fiscal necessity. Kings, particularly Sigismund, required vast sums to fund the Hussite Wars and the nascent Ottoman defense system. Since royal domain lands had been extensively alienated to pay debts, the crown was entirely dependent on the nobility's willingness to vote for new levies, such as the lucrum camerae. This reliance provided the nobles with decisive leverage to demand the ratification of existing rights and the establishment of new constitutional limits on monarchical action. A crucial development was the establishment of the principle of delegated representation. The assembly transitioned from a body where all nobles attended in person to one where counties sent elected delegates instructed on the necessary political position. This change ensured that the Diet remained a manageable, yet truly representative, voice of the Universitas Nobilium, the entire body of Hungarian nobility, regardless of status. This institutional change effectively neutralized the king's ability to bypass the national consensus by dealing solely with individual amenable magnates. The formalization of the Diet reinforced the constitutional legacy initiated by the Golden Bull of 1222, specifically institutionalizing the right of resistance, ius resistandi, within the political process. The Diet now functioned as a continuous political check, establishing the kingdom as a unique type of feudal limited monarchy in Central Europe. The king was constitutionally bound to uphold the privileges and laws passed by the assembly, turning the nobility from mere subjects into active partners in the kingdom's governance. The Diet's institutional power became the enduring constitutional counterweight to royal ambition for the remainder of the medieval period. The middle decades of the 15th century plunged the Hungarian kingdom into a state of continuous military mobilization, dominated by the rise of János Hunyadi. Originating from a noble, non-magnate family in Transylvania, Hunyadi's ascent was based entirely on his extraordinary, proven military capability, recognizing the need for decisive action against the relentless expansion of the Ottoman Empire. His early career was distinguished by service as a mercenary captain and later as a key commander under Sigismund, providing him with first-hand experience of the Ottoman war machine's strengths and weaknesses. Hunyadi's political influence grew exponentially during the tumultuous succession struggles that followed Sigismund's death. Recognizing the critical need for unified, effective leadership, the Hungarian Diet increasingly delegated operational authority to him. By 1446 CE, the nobility formalized this confidence by electing Hunyadi as the governor-regent gubernator, granting him supreme executive power over the realm during the minority of the Habsburg king Ladislaus Postumus. This constitutional status was unique, placing a non-crowned noble in charge of the entire state and military apparatus, fundamentally dedicated to the Antemurale Christianitatis, the defense of Christendom. Militarily, Hunyadi revolutionized Hungary's defensive strategy. He moved beyond the static Vegvar defense system by adopting an aggressive, offensive, deep strike doctrine. This approach culminated in the long campaign of 1443–1444, a vast military expedition that pushed deep into Ottoman-controlled Balkan territories, reaching as far as Sofia. These actions, characterized by rapid cavalry movement and coordinated attacks, temporarily shattered the myth of Ottoman invincibility and forced Sultan Murad II to negotiate a 10-year peace treaty, the Treaty of Szeged, in 1444. However, a subsequent, religiously motivated decision to break the peace treaty led to the catastrophic Battle of Varna later that same year. Despite Hunyadi's tactical skill, the Crusader army, which included the young Polish king Ladislaus III, suffered a devastating defeat. The death of the king during the battle was a profound loss, temporarily weakening Hungary's central authority, though Hunyadi himself survived and retained his military command, and later his governorship. Hunyadi's administrative achievement lay in his ability to maintain a standing, professional army funded through extraordinary measures approved by the Diet. He successfully organized and maintained the Banderium system, noble-led private armies, and supplemented these with hardened mercenaries. His greatest military triumph and the definitive moment of his career occurred in 1456 CE at the Siege of Belgrade, Nandorfehérvár. Faced with the full might of Sultan Mehmed II, Hunyadi commanded a successful relief force that included crusaders and peasant levies, organized by Street John of Capistrano. The victory secured the crucial Danube gateway and halted the primary direction of Ottoman expansion into Central Europe for over 60 years, permanently cementing Hunyadi's legendary status. The pivotal decision to launch the Varna campaign in 1444 CE followed the signing of the 10-year Treaty of Szeged earlier that same year. This treaty, negotiated after János Hunyadi's successful long campaign into Ottoman territory, had secured a temporary cessation of hostilities. However, influenced by the papal legate Cardinal Giuliano Cesarini and the promise of Venetian naval support to prevent the Sultan's return to Europe, the Christian leadership chose to unilaterally violate the truce, believing the strategic moment was too valuable to lose. This decision was formally ratified by a council of war, prioritizing religious ambition over diplomatic stability. The crusade was primarily commanded by the young King Vladislaus III of Hungary and Poland, with Hunyadi serving as the key military operational commander. The composite Christian army, numbering approximately 20,000 to 30,000 men, included Hungarian and Polish feudal levies, Bohemian and Moravian mercenaries, Wallachian detachments, and Crusader volunteers from across Europe. The force was characterized by a lack of cohesive training and unified command, issues that plagued its operational effectiveness. The strategy involved a swift march south through the Balkans, aiming to provoke a decisive battle before the Ottoman army could mobilize fully. However, the anticipated Venetian fleet failed to effectively blockade the Dardanelles and the Bosporus, allowing Sultan Murad II to transfer his main army from Anatolia back into the European theatre. This logistical failure was the first catastrophic blow to the campaign's viability, placing the Christian army in direct confrontation with a significantly larger, veteran Ottoman force. The ensuing Battle of Varna took place on the 10th of November 1444, near the Black Sea port of Varna in modern-day Bulgaria. The Ottoman army utilized its core strength, Janissary infantry supported by Balkan levies and superior artillery. Hunyadi initially achieved local successes, executing a disciplined maneuver on the flanks. However, the battle turned irrevocably when the impetuous King Vladislaus, ignoring Hunyadi's cautionary counsel, led a premature charge directly into the entrenched Janissary centre. Vladislaus was quickly cut down and decapitated, resulting in the instantaneous collapse of morale among the Crusader forces. The subsequent rout was devastating, leading to the complete destruction of the Christian army and the death of numerous high-ranking nobles and clergy, including Cardinal Cesarini. The immediate geopolitical consequence was the profound political vacuum in Hungary, necessitating Hunyadi's immediate return to assume the regency. The battle confirmed the systemic military superiority of the centralized Ottoman state over the fragmented feudal armies of Europe, and permanently shifted the perception of the Ottoman threat from a regional border conflict to an existential peril for the Christian kingdoms. The definitive confrontation between the Kingdom of Hungary and the expanding Ottoman Empire occurred at the fortress of Nándorfehérvár, known internationally as Belgrade, in 1456 CE. This engagement was critical because the Ottoman military objective was to capture the fortress, which served as the strategic gateway to the Great Hungarian Plain and Central Europe. The Hungarian defense was directed by János Hunyadi, who, despite having resigned his governorship, maintained supreme operational authority over the defensive war effort. The scale of the offensive was unprecedented, commanded directly by Sultan Mehmed II, who had recently conquered Constantinople. The Ottoman siege force comprised an estimated 70,000 to 100,000 veteran troops, supported by over 300 vessels on the Danube and a massive siege train, including bombards capable of firing colossal stone balls. This concentration of force indicated the Sultan's intent to permanently remove Hungary as a military obstacle. The fortress itself was defended by a core garrison led by Hunyadi's brother-in-law, Mihály Szilágyi. The defense relied on a sophisticated system of triple fortifications, But the greatest challenge lay in penetrating the Ottoman naval blockade on the Danube. Hunyadi's immediate operational priority was to assemble a relief force capable of breaking this blockade and resupplying the besieged fortress. His resources were limited, as the high nobility were reluctant to fully fund the defense. Hunyadi's relief army was therefore a composite force, integrating a small contingent of his own mercenary cavalry with a vast, untrained contingent of peasant crusaders. These levies, organized and motivated by the fiery Franciscan preacher St. John of Capistrano, represented a unique mass mobilization of non-feudal combatants, armed primarily with agricultural tools and religious fervor. This combined force managed to break the naval blockade in a coordinated river battle on July 14, securing the Danube and allowing vital supplies and reinforcements to enter the fortress. The land battle began with a massive, sustained Ottoman bombardment that successfully breached the outer wall of the fortress. During the subsequent Ottoman infantry assault, Hunyadi executed a brilliant counterattack. A small force under his personal command fought desperately to repel the Ottoman veterans from the breaches. The turning point of the engagement, however, was an unauthorized countersally. Inspired by the battle's ferocity and Capistrano's rallying cries, the peasant crusaders surged out of the fortress in pursuit of the retreating Ottoman vanguard. Hunyadi, recognizing the immediate tactical advantage of this aggressive movement, galvanized his professional troops and committed fully to the external counterattack. The ensuing confusion and the unexpected fury of the Christian countercharge resulted in the capture of the Ottoman artillery positions and panic within the Sultan's camp. Critically, Mehmed II himself was wounded during the chaotic engagement. Faced with overwhelming losses and the loss of his command structure, the Sultan ordered a full retreat. The devastating Ottoman defeat secured the key southern frontier and provided Central Europe with a crucial period of peace from direct, large-scale Turkish invasion for approximately 70 years. The ascent of Matthias Hunyadi to the Hungarian throne in 1458 CE was unprecedented, marking the first time a member of the high, non-dynastic nobility had been elected king by the Diet. Following the death of Ladislaus Postumus and the ensuing period of political instability, the magnates, backed by the lesser nobility, settled on the son of the national hero, János Hunyadi. This elevation was not immediate. Matthias first had to be redeemed from imprisonment in Prague, where he was held by the Bohemian regent, George of Poděbrady, whose daughter he subsequently married. Matthias immediately confronted the problem of fragmented royal authority, seeking to reverse the debilitating power of the great magnates and establish true centralized control over the kingdom's administration and finances. His first major reform focused on the establishment of a rigorous modern system of taxation. He systematically consolidated the various royal revenues, placing them under centralized oversight and ensuring consistent collection. This fiscal reorganization, which included revenue from customs duties and the 30th tax, provided the stable, unprecedented income necessary to fund his most famous creation. The centerpiece of his power was the Fekete Sereg, the Black Army, a standing, professional mercenary force of extraordinary discipline and effectiveness. Unlike the traditional feudal levies of Western Europe, which were temporary and unreliable, the Black Army was permanently salaried, highly trained, and equipped with the latest firearms, including arquebuses and hand cannons. At its height, the army numbered between 2,000 and 3,000 men, establishing Hungary as a dominant military power in the region and enabling Matthias to pursue ambitious foreign policies. Matthias leveraged this military strength not only for defense against the Ottomans but also for expansion into Western territories. Recognizing the political value of controlling the Austrian and Bohemian frontiers, he waged successful wars against both Frederick III of the Holy Roman Empire and the Hussite king of Bohemia. These campaigns resulted in the acquisition of Moravia, Silesia, and Lusatia, culminating in Matthias's capture of Vienna in 1485 CE, where he subsequently moved his royal court. Culturally, Matthias transformed the court at Buda into one of the most brilliant centers of the Renaissance north of the Alps. He was a devout patron of humanism, inviting Italian scholars, artists, and architects to his court, thereby integrating Hungary into the cutting edge of European intellectual life. His dedication to learning culminated in the foundation of the Bibliotheca Corviniana, one of the most famous libraries of the Renaissance world, housing thousands of secular and theological manuscripts, many illuminated by Florentine artists. This cultural zenith contrasted sharply with the traditional military focus of Central European monarchies, establishing Matthias not merely as a warlord, but as a sophisticated Renaissance sovereign. His centralization of power, reliant on meritocracy and professional administration, temporarily lifted Hungary to its peak of prestige and influence. The court of Matthias Corvinus, situated primarily in Buda and Visegrad, functioned as a deliberate transplant of the Italian High Renaissance into Central Europe. Matthias fostered an intellectual and artistic environment that consciously emulated the grand courts of Florence and Naples, transforming the aesthetic of Hungarian statecraft. This cultural policy was central to his identity as a modern sovereign, projecting an image of erudition and sophisticated power that transcended the kingdom's geographical position on the often violent periphery of Christendom. The king's profound personal commitment to humanism drove this cultural zenith. He ensured that Buda became a destination for the foremost scholars, philosophers, and artists of the age, drawing talent from Italy and the German principalities. Figures like the court historian Antonio Bonfini and the philosopher Galeotto Marzio resided permanently at Buda, ensuring the rapid and thorough integration of classical learning and new Renaissance thought into the kingdom's intellectual bloodstream. The crowning achievement of this era was the Bibliotheca Corviniana. Established and meticulously curated by Matthias, it quickly grew into one of the largest and most valuable repositories of knowledge in the entire world, surpassed only by the Vatican Library in scope and quality. The library was specifically dedicated to collecting and preserving the foundational texts of classical antiquity, alongside contemporary humanist works, theological treatises, and volumes on natural philosophy. The library's true splendor lay in its collection of illuminated Corvinian manuscripts, Corvini. These volumes were commissioned on an industrial scale, written and decorated by skilled scribes, miniaturists, and binders, many brought directly from Florence to work in the Buda scriptorium. These manuscripts were characterized by their exquisite quality, featuring intricate ornamentation, vibrant pigments, and the king's personalized crest, the raven holding a ring, Corvus. The sheer volume of this specialized production required an organized workshop system that was unique outside of Italy. The existence of the Corviniana underscored the wealth generated by Matthias's fiscal reforms, as the acquisition and creation of the library represented an immense financial investment. It was a tangible political statement, demonstrating that Hungary was not merely a military barrier against the Ottomans, but an essential contributor to the shared intellectual heritage of Europe. Beyond the written word, the court patronized monumental architecture, incorporating Italianate loggias, frescoes, and sculpted fountains into the royal palaces, most notably the Palatium on Castle Hill in Buda. This blend of formidable military capability with intellectual and artistic patronage represented the high water mark of Hungary's prestige and influence in the late medieval period, a brief, brilliant epoch before external pressures and internal decline began to challenge the kingdom's structural integrity. The death of Matthias Corvinus in 1490 CE extinguished the centralized, efficient monarchy he had forged, immediately plunging the kingdom into a severe political and fiscal crisis. The elected successor was the Polish Prince Władysław II of the Jagiellonian dynasty, who had previously ruled as King of Bohemia. Władysław's ascension was largely secured by the great Hungarian magnates who explicitly sought a weak ruler who would validate their aristocratic power. The result was an immediate, structural decline of royal authority. Władysław II, renowned for his pliability, earned the epithet dobre, meaning "it is good" in Slavic, for his habitual compliance with the demands of the powerful noble council. The first catastrophic consequence of this decline was the inability to maintain the Black Army, the cornerstone of Corvinus's power. Without the requisite centralized tax revenue, the army's high operating costs became unsustainable. Faced with mounting pay arrears, the mercenaries mutinied and were subsequently disbanded by the magnates in 1494 CE, eliminating Hungary's only professional, standing defence force. The resulting power vacuum was filled by the magnates and the wealthy noble families, who effectively became the sovereign power. They used the Diet to pass legislation that curtailed the rights of the lower nobility and, most significantly, legally bound the vast peasant population to the land. This codification of second serfdom effectively reversed decades of slow social progress and transformed the peasantry into a permanently oppressed class, subject to ever-increasing labour and financial demands. The legislative decline was compounded by the rule of Louis II, who succeeded his father Vladislaus in 1516 CE at the age of 10, initiating a long regency dominated entirely by the most ambitious noble factions. The absence of effective central governance exacerbated internal tensions, which exploded violently in 1514 CE with the Dossa peasant revolt. This uprising originated as a state-sanctioned anti-Ottoman crusade, organized by Cardinal Tamas Bakoch. Thousands of peasants volunteered, expecting military training and potential social advancement. However, the great nobles, fearing the mobilization of an armed peasant class, attempted to halt the crusade and force the peasants back to the fields. Led by the experienced Székely soldier György Dossa, the now armed crusaders transformed into a revolutionary force, explicitly targeting the landowning nobility and their castles. The revolt spread across the Great Hungarian Plain with terrifying speed, threatening to dismantle the entire feudal system. It was brutally suppressed by the Transylvanian voivode János Zápolya after the siege of Temesvar. The ensuing retribution was horrific, with Dossa being publicly tortured and executed by being seated on a heated iron throne. Furthermore, the 1514 Diet codified a punitive set of laws, the Tripartitum, which formally established the perpetual servitude of the entire Hungarian peasantry, ensuring that the final decades of the unified medieval kingdom were defined by acute internal social hostility and a dangerously weakened military structure. The catastrophic final confrontation of the unified medieval kingdom materialized on the 29th of August 1526 at the Battle of Mohács. The military decision to engage the overwhelming Ottoman forces was made out of necessity, driven by the rapid advance of Sultan Suleiman I, Al-Kanuni, the Magnificent, whose strategic objective was the permanent elimination of Hungary as an effective barrier to Ottoman expansion into Central Europe. Despite extensive international diplomatic efforts, no substantial, unified imperial or papal aid materialized to bolster the kingdom's defense. The Hungarian military response suffered from fundamental flaws in preparation and execution. The royal army that assembled near Mohács was tragically undersized, numbering approximately 2,500 men, significantly fewer than the 6,000 to 8,000 troops mobilized by the Sultan. Critical time was lost due to the delays of the two largest contingents, the Transylvanian forces under János Zápolya and the Croatian Bohemian levies, neither of which reached the battlefield in time to participate in the engagement. The command structure was further hampered by the inexperience of the 19-year-old King Louis II and the conflicting strategies advocated by the military and ecclesiastical leadership. The battle itself was brutally brief and decisive. The Hungarian forces, driven by the urgency of avoiding a siege of the interior, deployed on a narrow, marshy plain near the Danube. The engagement lasted less than 2 hours. The core of the Hungarian defence relied on the heavy cavalry charge, a tactic that was rendered obsolete by the Ottomans' superior use of artillery and disciplined infantry. The Sultan deployed a centralized line of hundreds of cannons and thousands of Janissaries elite. Musketry-equipped infantry positioned immediately behind the initial irregular cavalry screen. When the Hungarian cavalry launched their charge, they were met with devastating, coordinated fire from the Ottoman cannons and small arms. This combined arms fire shattered the cohesion of the Hungarian ranks turning the charge into a rout. The tactical annihilation was absolute. Estimates suggest that nearly 14,000 Hungarian soldiers were killed, including 7 bishops, 28 magnates, and the highest secular officials of the realm. The most profound consequence was the death of King Louis II. He was not killed in direct combat, but perished attempting to flee the collapsing battle lines, drowning in the marshy Szély stream near the Danube. His death extinguished the Jagiellonian dynasty in Hungary and initiated a violent and immediate power vacuum. The Ottoman forces proceeded to occupy and pillage the capital cities of Buda and Pest, but withdrew the main army, establishing strategic control without immediate annexation. The resulting political disaster led directly to the dismemberment of the medieval kingdom. The Hungarian nobility elected 2 rival kings, Ferdinand of Habsburg and János Zápolya. This dual election triggered a civil war, providing the strategic opportunity for the Ottomans to return and formally seize the central third of the country, including Buda, in 1541 CE. The Kingdom of Hungary was thus permanently partitioned into 3 distinct entities. Royal Hungary, Habsburg, ruled, the central Pashalik of Buda, Ottoman, occupied, and the autonomous Principality of Transylvania, forever concluding its existence as a unified, independent medieval state.